Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tech Leaders Hub, episode number 16. So glad to see you here with us today, especially if you're watching live. My guest today is Dave Marsland, CTO at Finematter. Dave, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Super excited. This is our second session this week. I keep talking about it. Super excited that we're having more and more sessions and more people can benefit from the experience of tech leaders such as yourself. And so if anybody's joining live, very grateful to have you here. I'm going to ask some of the traditional questions. You may have heard them 2 days ago. So if you can hear us and if you can see us, please say hello in the chat, that you can see us and hear us and that everything is working correctly on a technical level, because it's super important. We have a Tech Leaders Hub podcast. It's on Spotify. It's on Google. The audio is very important for that, and the audio gets lifted straight from this episode. So it's crucial that you let us know that this is all working correctly. Please let us know. And in the meantime, people are still joining in. There's a bit of a delay. Dave, I wanted to ask you, given what we're going to talk about today, we're going to be revolving around the employee life cycle, going beyond just the onboarding. And I'm super excited to talk about that, actually. Who do you hope will be tuning in? Who will benefit the most from listening to our conversation?
I genuinely think the people who benefit the most is going to be tech leaders who are likely at startups going through that super exciting growth phase, where you essentially want to either spend as quickly as possible or spend as carefully as possible the great investment you've got from your backers. And obviously the temptation is to hire as many people as you can as quickly as possible, and upgrade your team and level up your team. So I hope that those kind of people can get a good feel for how to do that carefully and how to keep the kind of people that they're hiring in mind.
Okay, yeah, great. And I'm really excited for this. I think this is on a lot of people's minds right now, growing their companies, growing their teams, but doing it in a way that keeps just 2 days, it was mentioned in a session, the talent. No, sorry, I was talking with another upcoming guest. He mentioned talent density. I really like that thought. So that's a tease for the future, for a future session coming in March. Anyway, people are watching and are listening. Let me just feature them for a sec. Bart is saying, "Hey Dave, hey Jakub." You can call me Jakub. You can call me Kuba too. I accept both. John is saying hello. Chris is waving, and Alex is saying loud and clear. Thank you for joining us, everyone. And we will really hope you will enjoy the session today. Now, since this is Tech Leaders Hub, what I focus on is providing value to the people watching and listening, and I like to provide the value up front. So before we get into Finematter, before we get into your story thus far, your life as a CTO and all the background, I want to ask you the traditional Tech Leaders Hub question. Are you ready for it?
Hit me.
Okay, there we go then. So Dave, what is your number one tip for tech leaders?
I hinted at it then, but I think hire deliberately is probably my best tip. There is a temptation to bulk out your team as quickly as possible with amazing people to deliver on all the amazing things that your company wants to do. But hiring slower and making sure that their onboarding process and their development within your company is good and effective. Even if you're looking at LinkedIn and seeing all the posts of like, we're hiring like crazy, please come and join us. They're great, and it's great to see growth in the industry, but it's also important to be like, it's deliberate, sustained growth of people as well as your company is far more useful for you than going and hiring 30 people at once and then having no idea how to manage them or to onboard them effectively or to make them happy or to support them. So that's a good tip, I think, is don't get too excited when all the money comes in and try and spend it all at once. I think be sensible and considered, I think, is the best approach.
I love that. I really do. So now somebody, listening to this might think, okay, I should probably start hiring more deliberately. I should implement that. What do you think would be the first step? Is it a conversation? Is it setting expectations? Is it, somehow baking that into your process? How do you start?
Yeah, I think a good way to think about it is you can think about it as, especially for explaining it to some more senior stakeholders, is the cost of hiring someone is not just the time taken to hire them and the potential recruitment fee that you're using if you're using an external recruiter. It's the time taken for them to get up to speed. It's the impact on the team of developing them properly. It's the time for the manager to onboard these people effectively. It's their And I think adding another person who needs development and adding another person who needs that support. Plan all these things and consider these things before you do your hiring, so you're not surprised and you're like, oh, actually, we're not going to hit that deadline that I thought we were going to hit because we've got all these new people, but they're not giving me the stuff that I need. It's because you haven't factored in their growth and their support and their time that's needed to ramp up and get up to speed.
Yeah, exactly. That makes a ton of sense. And that is our number one tip for tech leaders for today. And tune into the next session to get the next one, obviously. All right. So with that in mind, we are going to come back to a lot related to what we were just discussing in just a moment. But first, Dave, how about you tell us about yourself as a CTO, Finematter, what it does. I really love your business, and actually, it's really unique, I think. So maybe let's start there, and your role within Finematter. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, sure. So obviously I'm CTO at Finematter. We are a marketplace for independent jewelers to sell their jewelry who may or may not have an e-commerce offering already. Our main philosophy is that jewelry is not a fashion accessory. Jewelry isn't fashion. It's long term. It will outlive all of us. You'll likely hand it down to your kids or for family members. So we put that weight against it. We also offer a range of services for the jewelry that you own, you don't buy through us. At the moment, recycling and resizing and kind of renewing of existing jewelry. We'll be offering other ones in the near future as well. Our goal is to become the authority for jewelry ownership. So that involves certification, appraisals, tracking of jewelry, with all of the interesting things that can fall out of that, as we can all imagine, I'm sure. But these precious pieces of carefully crafted material are out there. They will, like I say, they're not getting thrown away like a cheap piece of kind of £20 fashion accessory that if you lose it, you'll buy another one. This is, no, a designer has spent potentially weeks or months of their time crafting this thing. It deserves weight and it deserves care and attention. While you're the custodian of it, it will also be passed on to someone else.
Okay. And, when you go out to the market, with this kind of offering and, with what you're doing, how do they usually respond?
It's really good, actually. I think there's the designers really appreciate the attention that we give and the kind of focus that we have on the designer-led approach, because we focus on having a curated assortment of pieces and a curated selection of designers who are aligned with our sustainability goals. It isn't we've got 20,000 pieces of jewelry, we'll offer you the best one. It's we have these 50 amazing designers, here's why each one is individual, and here's what we'd recommend that's personal to you. So the reaction from the customers is great because they get the kind of purchasing experience for these fine pieces. We help some of these jewelers who have never sold outside of their country before to deal with what are the extremely complicated rules around customs charges, especially with Brexit in mind. We deal with all of that for them as well. But also like I say, the level of aftercare that these customers get with the pieces that they have and the pieces that they didn't buy through us. And that's where I think our kind of key differentiator is that we care for your whole collection of jewelry. It's not just the piece that you bought through us.
Okay, yeah, I love that. And within the whole kind of machinery of Finematter, what is your role? What are you responsible for? What does your day-to-day look like right now?
Yes, I'm responsible for tech and product. So it's a lot around kind of really analyzing our customers, going after. We're a relatively new business, kind of 18 months or so in terms of kind of formative years. So it's a lot around what we build next, how we start to integrate these services together. How do we get this person who's bought this expensive piece of jewelry and this person who's renewing something they've had for years? How do we kind of mix and match these people together to get them to use the services that each other is focusing on? So my day is a lot of that. And also on the technical side, it's I've worked in a number of marketplaces over the course of my career, kind of just in the most formative years in terms of marketplaces, but others as well. So trying to learn on some of that experience and work with a small but incredibly talented group of engineers that I have and designers to work on features that make the most sense for us and make the most sense for this kind of size of business. As anyone watching who works in a startup will know, it's difficult to decide what to do when there's 1,000 things you could be doing. And most of my role is deciding what comes when and what do we do next.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious about that because I feel like that's a challenge that a lot of managers can sympathize with, myself included, honestly. So, do you have like a way of thinking or like a framework for prioritizing what you have to do in a given day or a week?
So some of it, I guess, is well, personal time. I tend to have days dedicated to things.
Hmm.
So I might have a day dedicated to that I keep particularly clear, just to try and think about stuff that's coming up in the next kind of quarter or 2 quarters. I don't try and think more than 6 months in advance because it's a lifetime in a startup, really, to be honest. Um,
Hmm.
so I try and hold a day for that. I try and hold a day for making sure I'm helping out with the technical team and making and ahead of those kind of conversations and being available for when I need to unblock people. Um, have a day for making sure that I'm refocusing on my team and making sure that I've got all of their development needs in check. And if we're doing any hiring, make sure the onboarding process is effective. And then a kind of a day for more kind of management and strategic stuff as I talk to Caroline and me, who are the two co-founders at Finematter, around wider business needs, how we can make sure the development team is helping those departments succeed. So yeah, so I try and I'm one of those people who books in meetings for myself, essentially, in calendars. That tends to be my way of working.
Yeah, I totally get that. What I started doing was at the end of my day, I put like it's like a to-do list, but it's on my calendar. So it's like the final kind of 2 hours. These are actually focus slots, but at least I know that nobody's going to book me there at the end of the day, and that's when I
Exactly.
can kind of clear my head, forget about what happened in all the meetings, and get some individual work done and have some focus. So I understand that completely. And I'm curious about one more thing before we get into the
Yeah.
subject at hand, but I do get curious about certain things. So when I'm thinking about kind of my calendar or a leader's calendar just in general, it's like I find time for the urgent things, we all do, but there's always the things that are important, never urgent, but if you don't focus on them, then trouble arises. I wonder, what is that, in your view, that tech leaders might be kind of missing, not giving enough priority, not putting on their calendars when they really, really should.
I think from a technical and kind of product leader standpoint, in particular, if you start to treat things that you're ignoring as technical debt, it becomes a bit easier to kind of mentally map, especially for technical leaders, of this is just building up. If I don't pay it off at some point, it's really going to like bite me in the ass at some point later on. The things that tend to go in that bucket tend to be talking to the internal teams about the problems that they have.
Mm.
There's a temptation in startups, and it's happened in every startup I've ever worked in, where you do the scrappy approach to a product or a solution to get it out and to get validation in the market. Normally
Yeah,
means your operations team is doing a lot of heavy lifting in the background to make it all work and pulling the strings and spinning the plates.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and because they're normally incredible people who are very diligent at what they do, they won't complain unless you ask them, like, is there anything, what's the most inefficient part of this process that we can make a bit easier? And
Mm.
normally it doesn't take that much effort to do it, but that's the long lasting technical debt within your business that you need to be aware of, that will, as you start to scale, those will be the things that are the most painful. Like you don't want to have to hire a new person for every service you create. It has to be a sustainable way of growing. So that's the things to keep an eye on.
Okay, so as a tech leader, what I should put on my calendar is talk with ops and ask them about this burden that they've been silently bearing and not complaining about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there will be a team of people who are amazing at working around all the problems that you've created within the admin tools that you've created for them, and they won't tell
Mhm.
you because they've gotten really good at it. And
Okay.
sitting with them, like go sit with them for half a day and just watch the processes. And like, why do you have 3 tabs open? So, it's because I can't get back and forth really easily. Like, we
Okay.
can add a back button, and now you're 3 times more efficient. It's
There
that
we
kind of
go.
simple stuff that's really important.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Excellent. Thank you. And this was not on the agenda, but I'm glad I got it out. I think it's a great
Yeah.
tip. So you've got, more than one tip for tech leaders as we kind of warmed up here, but now we're almost 15 minutes into the session. Let's get to the subject matter at hand then. The employee lifecycle. And by the way, dear watchers and listeners, we'll be revolving around this subject, but if there's anything you're particularly curious about what we're going to talk about, or just anything within this subject, please ask questions. You get the most out of Tech Leaders Hub when you engage personally, and when you leave those comments, we try to answer all of them. So don't hesitate. In the meantime, I have some questions of my own that I'm going to ask. So first of all, well, let's start with cliche, but let's start maybe with how do you understand the employee life cycle? And when you tell people about you should be focusing on the whole employee life cycle, what are you kind of calling them to do?
Yeah, so one of the key philosophies that I try and work with when I manage people is that you manage the person, not the job role that you've hired for, or the role that you're hiring for. So that the employee life cycle encompasses not only the hiring process, it's the onboarding process, it's the development process, and the bit that everyone ignores because it's the hardest bit is the leaving of the business. Like whether that is most of the times the employee's decision. That has to be something that you cater into and take into account because it is just as important as the onboarding process. Like it has to be dealt with in a kind of careful and sensitive manner, but also these people, if you give them bad experience when they leave the business, whether it's their choice or yours, they are a detriment, like their detriment and kind of a detractor to your business within the market. Whereas if you treat them like as you would do with any other person who's going through the same situation, they will be doing soft hiring for you for the rest of their career because they'll be like, I had a really good experience there. It wasn't right for me at the time, but you should definitely go and work there. And that's so powerful because we all know how hard it is to hire in the moment, and we all know how expensive recruitment can be. So the more kind of reputational kind of credit you have in the market, the better life is.
Yeah, I can totally feel that, on both ends, really, because there is this stress around, this person is probably going to leave at some point. And, the first thought, your mind immediately goes to, okay, how do I prevent them from doing that? I think that's the knee-jerk reaction, you could say. But I really like, your approach and your thinking here in terms of, okay, I have to come to terms with the fact that some of these people are going to leave. How do I turn them into like this ambient positive PR, in the market for new people joining? Because really, I have some thoughts on this, honestly. And my thought is, I was listening to a podcast. It was an interview with the CEO of Spotify, I believe. And what he did was he kind of sets missions for people. So it's like for each person, it's like you have role X, and never mind the title of the role, but your mission for the next 2 years is this and this and that. And I feel like thinking, about people in that sort of way. It's like, okay, this person might be coming in for, I don't know, 2 missions, 4 years, but then their most natural step is probably going to be in a different company, maybe if they end up growing that way. Yeah. So sorry to interject there, but it immediately came to mind.
No, and like I say, it's about you map the person. You think about the person, not think about the job role. Like that person who's coming in, what stage of life are they at? What are their drivers in their personal life? What are they going to need next? Can you give it to them? If you can't, that's also fine. You can help them take the next step in their career if you treat them as a person, not treat them as another number in that 30-person hiring plan that you've got.
There you go. Yeah. So when you do talk with the people, for example, on your team, or imagine a tech leader who wants to start thinking about this whole employee life cycle, does this change your conversations with your reports? Is this something that you kind of track together in terms of growth? How does this look? What I'm curious about is what does this look like in practice? Is this something that you put in the person's mind? Think about your exit and not just your onboarding, or how does that usually work?
Yeah, so I find that it tends to come around quite naturally if you make sure that your one-to-ones, and it's very easy for one-to-ones to become work-focused all the time, like project-focused. Yeah. How's things going? Anything I can help you with? Oh yeah, that is frustrating. Talk more about that. I try and make sure that my one-to-ones they alternate between how are you doing? How's your personal life? Is there anything you want to talk about? We can just have a chat about things like what's important to you. If you've got kids or you're thinking about having kids and that kind of stuff, like things that people might not want to talk about, and that's also fine. But if there's context there that's super important for me to help manage you better. If you can alternate between that and the kind of more work, kind of project-based one-to-ones, what it means is that you get so much further ahead of these conversations before they happen. Because really, if someone, for instance, gives in their notice to you and says they want to leave, and it's a surprise to you, you probably haven't been doing an amazing job with your one-to-ones. Like it shouldn't be a surprise. They're either frustrated because of something you can't do for them, and that's absolutely fine. They've got a better offer or something, but you hope to have built a relationship where that conversation is open enough where someone can go, yeah, no, I am thinking of moving on. And you can be like, great. Like, is there anything I can do to help you stay? No, okay. Is there anyone I can put you in contact with to help you get a job that you really want? Like that can be a mature conversation, but you need to put in the work up front to get to know your people and get to know kind of get a relationship as as much as you can. Obviously, with the caveat that be sensitive with the people that you're talking to and be sensitive with how much they want to share with you. But it's incredibly important because context is king. Like you spend most of your time outside of work, so it'd be great for people to for you to know your person outside of work better than you know them inside.
Yeah. As usual, I feel like I'm getting like a coaching session for free here, and that is, I think that's excellent advice. And it's like when you do have these more personal conversations, it's like the people let you in on a different level, and then when the time, even when they're considering a change, for example, because they know you just not just as your manager, but just somebody that they've connected with, they can then talk about it even before they make a decision. I've seen it happen.
Yeah. I want to make it really close. Well, it has to be authentic. Like if you're doing it for the sake of getting more information to manage them better, it's kind of half of the fight. Like you should be trying to build these relationships with the people that you manage genuinely, rather than just treating it as part of a management framework to make you better at the employee life cycle. It needs to be a genuine connection, because otherwise people will see through you as being a cynical attempt to get more information about what's important to you and what I can do to make you stay, which isn't what it's about. It's about having a genuine connection and making it part of that conversation.
Yeah, I understand that completely. So what I heard was, two kinds of conversations, alternating, perhaps one more personal, one more work-oriented. Now I'm thinking, within those more work-oriented conversations, is there something else that you do to also keep this employee life cycle, thinking into account? Does it affect growth reviews? Is it, do you often talk about, I don't know, the next role you would like to have, and I just wonder if you structure the conversation differently to support, thinking about this whole trajectory, whole path, and the exit as well.
Yeah. So I think on the kind of more work side of those one-to-ones, you can get a real good feel for where people want to be going in their career. Don't ask them every time you have a work-based one-to-one what you want to be doing with your career, because if someone asks you every 2 weeks, you're going to be like, I don't know. Same answer as like 2 weeks ago. Thanks for asking. But you want to get a feel for, is this person in a stage in their career where they're super ambitious, super driven, just want to be going through the next job titles to get where they want to be. You can support them in one way. Are they just happy where they are? They're really enjoying the job that they're doing and the role that they're in, and their personal life or situation, or just genuine desire means they don't want more responsibility, which is fine. Like, we shouldn't just be looking for people who are relentless, ridiculous kind of, I must get the next job title until I run out of job titles and I retire. That's not everyone. Or there are people who are just like, my personal life is more important to me at the moment because I'm having a kid, or I've got something to pay for, or I'm going through a house, I'm trying to, and I just want to make money to do those things. Like we need to not kind of guilt people into having to kind of passionately live the brand of the company and do it for the good of the company, when we're doing it because we love the company we work at and the people we work with, but to pay for the things that happen outside of work. Like, that's the reality of jobs. That's okay. We can be adult about that. But that will then dictate your kind of life cycle. Like, if someone who's super ambitious and wants to keep growing through the job titles, if you won't have that path for them, you can have that conversation and be like, I can absolutely help you get to senior engineer, but when you get to there, I don't have a principal engineer role and I won't have one in the next 2 or 3 years. I only have management positions, for instance. Do you want to go down that path? If you don't, then it might make sense for us to have a conversation about the kind of where you want to be after you move to senior engineer. And that can be a forward-looking conversation.
I feel like it takes a lot of courage as a leader to even initiate that, not just, consider that conversation or support it, but even initiate that sort of conversation.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult because you need to essentially acknowledge that the team that you put a lot of time and effort into won't be there in, say 2 years' time. And obviously we'd love to onboard people, have them for 10 years, build an amazing thing together, and everyone kind of rise off into the sunset after a big exit. That's not always, 99 times out of 100, that's not the case. You will meet people, you'll work with them, they'll transition out, you'll transition in. Like, it's everything's a kind of cyclical experience anyway.
Yeah.
If you can come to terms with that and bake that into your conversations, like great, like everything becomes a bit more adult, a bit more like, oh, they're actually this manager actually is one like thinking about what I want to be doing with my career and helping me get there, rather than just how can I get another year out of you at the company.
Yeah. And not trying to shoehorn somebody into a position that might not be the best fit for them in terms of their growth or even what they'll be bringing to the table.
Exactly. I could do another hour on how you don't pigeonhole engineers who are the most senior into management positions. But yeah, it's exactly the same. It's the same point. Like if you try and push someone who doesn't want to be a manager into a management position because you want to keep them, you'll make them unhappy, they'll be unproductive, and they will leave. And you've done wrong by them. So it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah, so it's better to consider the exit as an option, as a scenario that might be even likely, and to see how you can support that.
I mean, literally everybody will leave their job at some point. There's some people who will stay there, and unless you're a co-founder, you started your business, and you may stay there for the entire lifespan of that business. But if you're hiring in, at a kind of say mid or senior engineer level, there's a lifespan on people within a company, and just be mature about that. Deal with it upfront and in your conversations, rather than just ignoring it and being like, oh, and then being really annoyed when they say, oh, actually, I'm going to leave because I've got a better offer at a better company.
Yeah.
Then you're like, oh god, this is such a nightmare for me. I can't believe you inconvenienced me like this. It's like that's not. That's a bad way of looking at things. Like it's more like, I knew this was coming. I prepared for it. I know who I would hire to replace you. I'm going to help. I'll help you have a good exit, and you can help me onboard someone new.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, I love that. All of it, seriously, and everything that we're putting out there. If you're curious, watchers and listeners, about any part of what we're talking about here, do not hesitate to ask. What I would add on top of that is that, you mentioned certain days for certain things on your calendar. This concept kind of connects to me with what you were talking also about. Sometimes you have this one-on-one with a person and they tell you, well, work is not a priority right now because the life situation is happening. And I feel like this concept of certain times for certain things, it extrapolates. I can looking at my own life, it was this year was all about work and getting promoted, but then this other year was all about getting married, and other things happened in the meantime.
Yeah.
But it's like it's not the main focus of that particular point of time, or it could be years, it could be quarters, sometimes it's a month, but anyway, it's just these themes change, right?
Yeah. And none of this means you can't have a performance mindset. Like you still have to focus on having high performing teams, and that those teams are there to help the business grow. But you've got so much more context, and you can be to someone like, I think you're not performing as well as you normally are. What's going on? Like, is it related to this thing that you spoke about? And they could be like, yes. And then they go, okay, how can I help you, deal with that as well as perform for us as a company? It's everything's a conversation.
Yeah. Right. So another thing I'm curious about, still, within the subject of the employee life cycle is, so let's kind of lay it out a little bit more, because right now what I have in my mind is, okay, the onboarding is probably a beginning stage, maybe hiring even before that, right? So then you've got the onboarding, then there's something in the middle, and then the exit. So do you have like a framework for thinking about particular stages? Do you name them in a certain way? Do they have their certain characteristics? If you could lay it out, that would be very useful, I think.
Yeah, I don't tend to use a formalized framework just because people are so incredibly different when you try and start managing them in terms of what they need. So you can try and like it's easy to go through career ladders is the kind of the laziest way of having kind of a set of steps that you go through in your career. But ultimately you want to accept the fact that people are going to change over time. Their needs will change. The person they are changes. Their life situation changes. What they've learned has changed. What they like will change. So in reality, any framework that you put in place will probably change rapidly anyway. So you're better off having a development plan that is relatively short-lived, like maybe a quarter or a half year at a time, and setting like goals that are contextual to that part of their life. Because if you, as someone who had a kid reasonably recently, like if I'm set kind of goals around like being incredibly high performing in the first month after my child's born, I'm not going to be high performing the month after my child's born because I'm not sleeping. Like these development plans have to be contextual, and they have to be kind of sympathetic to the person. it doesn't mean that you can't have similar looking plans with different people. And you might start to kind of get a feel for the categories of people that you have. Like I say, whether you've got these kind of people who are steady in their career, people who are super ambitious, people who are more focused on their personal life, and you might have different development plans that you have for those kinds of people. But everyone's incredibly unique. So it's you want to try and give yourself as much flexibility as possible.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, because I'm trying to be analytical about this, but maybe too much, is that everybody goes through hiring, everybody goes through onboarding, but then when it comes to this middle, it's hard to divide it into particular stages because each situation is unique.
Yeah, you could. There's a question mark, I guess, on how long onboarding lasts. You could potentially divide that up into your actual onboarding, which is getting comfortable with your team, getting comfortable with the setup, understanding the role and being comfortable in it. And then your section after that, which is kind of bedding in, as in developing into a high performing person within a team, getting used to ways of working, the manager working out, like, getting really to know them and to know what motivates them, and knows like whether that person's in the right team as well. It could be a team makeup thing, which means that people perform better or worse. If you have 5 extroverts in a team, it might not be as good a mix as some introverts in there as well, or that kind of thing is well worth considering. But yeah, once you get into the kind of meat of someone's time at a company, I personally think it gets very nuanced.
Yeah. I'm curious about what you said with regards to this stage, kind of after the onboarding, but they're still kind of growing into the role, absorbing, the rest that, you cannot teach within just a few weeks. I wonder if you have any particular strategies for that, in terms of, do you check for it in a certain way? Is it about setting goals? It's like, okay, I'm trying to kind of suggest an answer here where it's probably totally different. So what's your approach here?
So there's kind of 2 stages in my mind for onboarding with different goals. First one, like say, understanding. A good goal that I tend to set people when they onboard is to get them to explain a part of the business back to the team. So for instance, present back to the team in a 15-minute quick whiteboard how order processing works. If you work on order processing team, it forces people to think it through, to be able to articulate it. The team can be really supportive and kind of give feedback, but it forces that kind of feedback loop. But once you're kind of out of that initial phase, it's really more around setting goals for how you can get to that high performing stage as quickly as practically possible anyway. If they know everything they need to do practically, they know all of the kind of tools and the ways of working and what have you, it's then starting to okay, how is that team dynamic? How do they fit in with that team? Because it's extremely rare you'd be hiring someone to work on their own. It's going to be more about, have you hired the right person for the right team? And do they work really well together? Are they improving their overall team performance? Because obviously engineering is a team game. It's not an individual game. So
sure.
And then try and keep the goals at a team level. If you can try to set individual goals, obviously, but they're quite difficult, because you can set arbitrary knowledge gathering ones, like explain all the processing, but it's harder to be like, deliver this thing, because actually it's a team thing that it's being delivered rather than an individual anyway.
Yeah, a lot of this, quote unquote individual work still happens with the support of other team members. So it's really hard to set individual goals. We've had more than one conversation about this actually in our teams, and we would tend to agree. So I'm curious. Okay, this might be a question that doesn't have like a definite answer, but I'm still going to kind of fish for it here, if you don't mind. Reaching this high performing state, reaching the end of this extended onboarding, this additional growth phase, do you have a way to kind of is there a way of knowing that a person has arrived there, or is it more of a gut feeling, it's just one day you wake up and you're there kind of thing?
I'd say it's tricky, because you start to get into kind of team and engineering delivery metrics, which is obviously a wide-ranging topic, and I still don't think anyone's got a particularly good answer. I mean, I think we've moved on from cycle time being the only metric that anyone uses, but it's very difficult. I think you can definitely use peer feedback as a way to figure this out. If the feedback from the rest of your team is super easy to work with, I'm giving them less and less support as they go along, and they're starting to become someone who is just picking up something as they would do for the rest of the team, that's probably a good sign that you've got someone who's bedded in well and they're starting to move into that stage where they're just a performing member of the team. Obviously, some of the warning signs are like, yeah, they're doing okay, but I still need to support them a fair bit. They're struggling to get their head around this particular concept. That's where you want to start drilling into chat to that person and be like, is our documentation bad, or is it hard for us to explain? Is it not easy to follow? Like, what's that kind of? Why is it so high touch with the rest of the team? Obviously, going back to the original point, the biggest impact on your business is going to be onboarding these people to the rest of your team. So that onboarding, you need to make sure that initial onboarding section doesn't get too elongated. Otherwise, you're starting to really impact your delivery.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I'm glad I actually asked this follow-up, because feedback from peers, that's something that, it's very actionable, I would say, something that you can take and actually check. And it does ring true also, that's, thinking from my perspective and from my experience, when I'm starting to get that feedback that, I don't have to support that person anymore, or, they are starting to support me, or, it's more of an equal relationship. That's how you know that they kind of arrived,
Yeah,
at this
absolutely.
high performing state. Exactly. All right. So again, dear watchers, if you're curious about any part of this that we're talking about, do ask your questions, because it's a whole breadth. It's somebody's whole story at a company, and it has so many different chapters. And some of the situations are going to be fairly unique. So anything you're curious about, leave a comment, ask a question. Meanwhile, I wanted to switch gears and to talk a little bit more about this deliberate hiring that we touched upon, at the beginning, because I asked about how to start kind of implementing that, but I was wondering, if there's anything more that goes into this process, deliberate hiring, more deliberate onboarding. Is there something that you started doing differently, or you think tech leaders should be doing differently in that regard to just put people on a better path within their companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two sides, but there's the impact on the company and the team, and there's the impact on the employee who's being hired. On the team side, the more people you can get to be good hirers and understand the process and be comfortable interviewing, the better. There tends to be you end up with a couple of people who do all of the interviews, especially at startups, because they have all the context and they become the gatekeepers of good for the business. The wider that is, the less those two people spend their entire week interviewing and then getting frustrated because all they're doing is interviewing. So there's that side of things where, scale your hiring team, your technical hiring team, as well as scaling the kind of hiring that you're doing. And then on the person side, it's okay to have loads of open roles, and I think that you need to have a hiring plan to meet your business's needs. But I think it's the rate that it's the capacity for onboarding that you need to plan in. So you may limit the amount of people that you bring in per month, because it just isn't practical for an engineering team to onboard 15 people in a month or 2 months. If the engineering team is 15 and you hire 15 people, everyone is onboarding someone else. It's an insane impact on a team, and something that a lot of companies just don't really consider as a cost either. It's so exciting to get the funding, it's so exciting to start hiring people, but then you don't realize actually that your velocity will go down as you hire more people until it goes up again afterwards. So for that person, like I say, meeting people that they're going to be working alongside as much as possible. I tend to make sure they meet people from around the business as well, because if you can get other parts of the business involved in the onboarding process as well, then obviously you're increasing the number of people who can take on that capacity, and it's not such a engineering hiring engineers and marketing hiring marketeers. It's the engineers meet the marketing team to chat about what it's like to work there and how they integrate with the engineering team. It gives more of a kind of rounded picture. I'd say rather than just being like a.
Yes, so sorry to interject, but I actually wonder. So, from the perspective of engineering, could you name one or two teams that are important to meet, but maybe sometimes overlooked?
I always say operations, because operations are probably, in my opinion, the most important team in any company, because they know the most about the customers. Talk to them every day, every frustration, every issue, every query comes to them first. Your monitoring will be great. I guarantee the customers will find out first. So them, probably most important. I tend to get marketing as well, mainly because it tends to be they tend to integrate with the product engineering team, but have a far more creative focus. So it's a good kind of mix of different mindsets to start thinking about. It also gives the people who are being hired a less of a feeling of like, you're not just a ticket factory, you're not just going to get work chucked in, see when it chucks out again. There are people who are behind these requests and people who have opinions of how they should be done, and it's important to talk to them. There's plenty of companies that go as far as each engineer spends a day in their first week with different teams and just sits with them for the entire day. It's good. Obviously, there's an impact on those teams when you do that, but it can give you a really rounded view of the business, which is obviously very important for startups, because you're going to be solving problems for each other, and that becomes a partnership. And if there's a great relationship between ops and engineering, when engineering break things and operations have to deal with it, there's a bit more sympathy. When operations are asking for things that aren't as important or perceived to be as important as the product roadmap, then there's a bit more kind of leeway and conversation going on. So that's a very important relationship.
Right. Okay. So that's the one we would highlight here. And I wonder, is there any particular way you structure these meetings? Is it just, take person from engineering, the new person, and put them, together with a person from marketing or operations?
Like genuinely, I get them to shadow someone for a day, to literally just sit beside them and just be like, watch what they're doing. I think Monzo do this, which is the extreme version of you do a weekend on customer support. So you actually get to hear the customers and you answer support calls and you've got the scripts and you know how to kind of deal with the customers, but you become incredibly aware of the customer you're developing for, which is so super important for onboarding. It means you'll get into the company culture, you'll understand who you're building for, and you'll understand that it's not, it gives context to those tasks that you're doing.
Okay. So we have a question coming in. I'm gonna get to that in just a second. I just wanted to follow up on something that you mentioned just a moment ago, while we're still in this context of onboarding.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So you mentioned, you've got 15 engineers, bringing on another 15 in the same month, probably a bad idea. So where do you think this kind of perfect balance could be achieved? How many usually would make sense to onboard within a given month? How does it relate to the number of people you already have on board? I know it's kind of, it's hard to predict, but maybe there's a feeling for it you've got.
It's the killer question, isn't it? Like what is the right level of hiring? I'd say it's really a function of your maturity within your onboarding. In my mind, onboarding is the most kind of time-consuming part of the hiring process. So how good is your documentation? If the person's got to ask and sit beside the most senior engineer you have to get the local environment up and running, you're going to struggle to do that 15 times. If you've got a reasonable onboarding process and you've got enough people to do the interviewing, so you're not taking 2 people out of the team for weeks at a time, like 3 or 4 people in a month for a team of 15 is still quite a lot. You're at like 10-15% of the team being added, so it is a lot. The better you get, the more you can do this, because obviously everyone you hire and onboard should then be trained up to be interviewing and help to onboard people, and then it becomes a cyclical thing where the more capacity to onboard, the more people you can hire. But that it forces you to look at your documentation. A great way of doing it is, and I've not worked with an engineer who doesn't do this naturally, which is great. But if you're onboarded as an engineer, you tend, one of your first tasks is to fix the README for all the things that aren't in the README that everyone just knows. Like, that thing in one password's got a trailing slash and we can't get it out, so just take the slash off, and no one's documented it. So everyone's got to ask every time they onboard. And if you can capture all those things and make that really slimline, then it's so much easier.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the additional detail there. And Beata, I promised to get to your question. Let's get to it now. So it's a bit more of a general question, but obviously this being Tech Leaders Hub, it definitely tracks. Beata is asking, what are the 3 most important traits of an excellent leader, in your opinion, and why those? So I'm very curious about your answer here.
Having worked with Beata, this has added pressure. So I think like empathy, and I would do a bit of cross promotion. I'd highly recommend checking out Beata's LinkedIn or Instagram, which is a great series on empathy and emotional kind of intelligence within development. Like empathy for the person you're managing is incredibly important. That's why like those leaders are the people that are you don't have to be universally liked, but you do have to be kind of make sure that people, feel listened to when they talk to you. I think like a mature and practical focus. So like I say, treat everyone like adults. Everyone who you're hiring is, going to have a beginning, middle, and end of their time with you. So treat them like with respect.
Mm-hmm.
And a third one is probably going to be around. I'm a big fan of, and it's taken me a while to get here. I'm a big fan of making sure that you practice what you preach when it comes to benefits and sensible working hours. So like if you're a technical leader who works through their lunch and stays until 8, all your engineers will think they have to work through their lunch and stay till 8. Like book your lunch in, take an hour for lunch, leave at 5:30 or 6 o'clock or whenever you need to leave, and make sure that you set some boundaries, because then everyone else will set the same boundaries. Like you have to lead by example.
Yeah. I love that answer. All of it, all three. And thank you, Bata, for asking the question. I also feel like a lot of it kind of we can apply back to the topic at hand. Oh, Bata's got a response already. He's saying, oh, thanks. And empathy rules. I feel like a lot of what you said, especially the first two, it relates back to having these conversations, these honest conversations about, like you said, there's a beginning, there's a middle, but there's also an end, and we cannot be blind to it. And it's about, being empathetic with their personal goals, which do not always align with the company's, and then practical in terms of, okay, so certain situations may arise, or may want to, make a different career choice, and let's just not ignore that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's naive, I think, or kind of you're ostriching in the sand if you just ignore the last part of someone's journey with you. It's going to happen. You might as well like face up to it and make it pleasant, rather than just being like, oh my god, I can't believe I quit. Like, well, maybe you should have asked before.
Yeah, there you go. So the ostriching thing, that was exactly what I had in mind. I just didn't have the right word for it. Thank you for kind of bringing
I'm not
that
sure
in.
ostriching is a word, but I like it anyway.
We're calling it ostriching. We're calling it.
Yeah,
if it's not. Okay, there you go. So I'm curious about two more things. Well, I'm curious about a ton more things, probably 1,000. But within being conscious of how much time we've actually got is okay. So I have one more question about onboarding, and then I would also like to talk a little bit more about the exit. So let's sticking with onboarding for a second more here. Meet with the other teams, have conversations with them, maybe even shadow them, maybe even hop on customer support. That's something that might be missed by a lot of tech leaders. But assuming they do have that as part of their process, is there anything else that often gets kind of missed, or people think that they're done with onboarding once they've done XYZ, but there's also this whole other area to to take care of? And again, I don't have like suggestions here, but is there anything else that's kind of commonly missed that you think is important?
I think that's a good question. Like I said, I think because the majority of people I've worked with do this, I hope it's prevalent in the industry, but I would re-emphasize it's your responsibility when you're onboarded to make the onboarding process better. And you need to impart that as the person who's onboarding. It should be a beautiful cycle of increasingly easy onboarding to the point where like I'm proud to say, someone who starts at Finematter, their local environment's up within the first half an hour, and they can see the site and they can work on it if they want to. That should be the bar that we're trying to get to. You won't start there. There'll be baggage. There'll be technical debt. It's the improve onboarding ticket is always the one you're going to deprioritize if you're looking at your backlog, but it's the one that's going to cost you the most if you want to hire another 10 people. So if you can do that in small improvements as you go through when you onboard new people, or get people who are being onboarded to improve the process themselves, that's an incredibly powerful little engine to improve your hiring process.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I like that answer a lot. So, and trying to kind of go through each stage of the cycle, then I feel like the one that we talked about the least, correct me if I got the wrong impression here, but it's like we talked about how to, a little bit more about this deliberate hiring, a little bit about the onboarding around the middle, how to do one-on-ones when they're kind of in the thick of it, week by week. Now the exit. So what I'm curious about is your tips for, okay, the person has given me the signal, that they want to exit. You agree that it is the best choice for them. Maybe you have a bit of a conversation about maybe we could make it work, maybe not. But then let's say it's happening. certainly. Then
Yeah.
how do you structure that? What kind of meetings then pop up on the agenda, or what kind of work, or what kind of attitude? Tell me everything, basically.
Yeah. So obviously it's the kind of trickiest part, but also kind of the most interesting, because it's where you start to figure out those like, it's an inelegant phrasing, but kind of people who were hit by a bus, it would be a disaster. Like those key people, like who's the dependencies in your team where if they leave, a bucket of knowledge that isn't documented anywhere disappears. These are the people that if someone decides they're going to be leaving, that's probably the first conversation. Is like, what is the thing that you get asked the most that no one else knows?
Yeah.
And how can we get that documented somewhere? How can we like impart that knowledge into the rest of the team effectively? So potentially their last, say they've got a month notice period, say their last 3 weeks is mostly preparing presentations and giving presentations to the rest of the team about, here's some things that I know from context of having worked here longer than you that you will need to know, or here's some information that I just do out of instinct, but it's worthwhile kind of documenting. Obviously, the ideal is that they would onboard the person that replaces them. It's extremely unlikely that happens very regularly. But if they are, great. If they're not, the person who's leaving is also another person who can help with the onboarding, but they're also the person who you need to be mindful of. The motivation of someone who is given their notice will go down over time, I think it's fair to say. So small deliverable goals like give this presentation on how this thing works, document this thing. They're the things to do. If you say to someone, improve this thing, or try and keep them working within the team at the same capacity and expect the same from them, you're not going to get it. Like as soon as someone gives the notice in, they're mentally working at the next place. Like so, you're essentially kind of fighting human nature about having to move on. So utilize that, give them small, helpful tasks to do, and then you can get the most out of them in that last month. And they're not, you don't want them to feel like they've been worked into the ground in their last month, where potentially they're also saying goodbye to people they really like working with, and they're going out for a drink, or they're like spending time lunch with people, or they're like having those relationships, and making sure that you're not like you say, just flogging them because you don't want another person to be impacting your development delivery speed.
Yeah, exactly. And this also influences what we were talking about earlier, them becoming positive PR for your company after they leave.
Absolutely. Obviously this I appreciate some people listening will be thinking this is an idealistic view of the world. Like there will be situations where there is a relationship breakdown, or something happens that is like irreconcilable, and there's some situations where some of this just won't work, because if both of you are not receptive to the process and both of you haven't got that empathetic relationship built up, it's very hard to then have an adult conversation about it. It becomes more of you have to be more formal. But that should be the exception. Like if everyone who leaves is you've let me down because I've got to hire someone else, you've not got the right relationship with your people at that point.
Yeah, I think navigating the emotional side of it could be, the most difficult here. Yeah. So what I'm curious about as well is, trying to recall the question. So we're talking about the offboarding, the exit. What I wanted to kind of throw in there was I was reading a book actually about documenting processes. I think it was called Clockwork. I do forget the author, as I want to do though. And one tip there was, if you're pressed for time, if there's a lot a person is involved in, and the time is short, just have them record themselves as they do something. Just record the screen and narrate through the process. And they can't always prepare a presentation with so many slides about how things are done the way they are, why they are done the way they are done, but at least they can show a person how to get from A to Z with a given process. It's already something, right?
Yeah, and it links back to the shadow and operations team. Like you'll sit beside someone, they'll do something, you'll be like, why did you do that? And they're like, do what? And like, because they don't think about it. And it's the same for someone who's offboarding. Like they've potentially got 2 or 3 years worth of instinct they need to try and unpack and then document, which is, like you say, it's very difficult.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I love that. Was there anything else with the exit that you think it's important to kind of take care of, take into account, a kind of step in the process that people miss?
I think, and I feel like all I talk about is impacts on the team, but it's true that as much as onboarding is an impact on your team, offboarding is as big an impact on your team, not just from one person less, but there is a team impact. Like that's potentially a well-liked person of that team who isn't there anymore, or someone who was asked lots of questions who isn't there anymore. Like you need to be mindful of that. If you try and just take someone else from another team and put them in there, you're essentially building a brand new dynamic within that team. So it's not a given that you can just plug that hole with another person with the same job title. Like that you have to rethink everything again. Like what does that team makeup look like?
Yes, and even though you might, plan capacity for onboarding, with offboarding is like it can happen a little bit unexpectedly, which to me highlights the importance of Slack, of not filling up the calendar and everybody's capacity to 100%, because then you can't support those kinds of scenarios.
Yeah, and as technical leaders, that's our job, right? That's stakeholder management. That is, I'm sorry, that thing that I said was going to get delivered just isn't, because that team can't do it in that time unless they worked all hours of the day, and that's not sustainable. So this is when this thing's going to get delivered. Like you have to be ahead of these things, and if you just ignore the fact that the team can cope, they'll just they'll pick up the slack. They won't be able to because there's a whole person missing.
So that's another kind of signal in your mind. This person just turned in their notice, so it's like, okay, I need to talk with the team, but I also need to talk with the stakeholders and let them know that things are going to change based on that.
Yeah, it's a risk.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I suppose, again, I'm kind of building the picture in my mind of this whole employee life cycle. We're almost at the end of our session. Obviously, the time flew by just as it always does on techleadershub. So I'm kind of, a little bit sad about that as per usual. But I do have one last question though, and that's about staying in touch, after somebody leaves the company. Is there, it's like I have the same question, just about different stages, tips, process, framework, tell me everything.
Yeah, so I think like every kind of relationship that you build with someone, it will either once you remove the work context from it, it develops into something completely different. Like there's people that I've worked with who I meet up with once every year or 2 years just to see how they're doing and catch up and discuss some things. There's people that I see every 2 or 3 weeks that I've worked with before. Like it really varies. I think that the most important thing is to, again, have those authentic relationships. Like you've built a network of people, and when you join a new company, you will obviously reach out to people you've worked with before to try and get them to join you, because that's people are great and you've worked with them before, and that's a great dynamic. But make sure those relationships are authentic. Like if you only talk to someone when you need something, and you don't ask how they are, or or some context that you might have had in the past, or that kind of more basic relationship, then it's a little bit inauthentic. And everything doesn't have to be like a life-changing friendship that you last forever, but it's these are relationships that you potentially saw someone every day for 3 years. That's a significant period of time.
Yeah, exactly. And one part that we kind of didn't have enough time to get into here was like, how do you also do that, all of that in a remote context? But I suppose at some point we'll have to maybe do a follow-up or something. And it's true. What is really clear in my mind now is that you cannot just start thinking about this personal level once they hand in their notice. It's like you build this foundation to keep in touch throughout the whole relationship. And if you don't take the time to focus not just on work, but also on the personal level, then it's too late by the time they're kind of on their way to exit. That's kind of what becomes clear to me based on this particular conversation. Yeah,
exactly.
All right. So 58 minutes in, we do have to start wrapping up here. So a few more, a couple points on the agenda before we go. First of all, Dave, I'm going to say thank you like about 7 times. So for the first time, thank you for sharing everything that you did share on this session. And I wanted to ask you if you have any announcements for our audience, where people should follow you, follow Finematter, any links you want to put out there would be a good time. Or are you hiring? Just tell me.
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking for interesting people who are keen to work at something that we genuinely think was going to be industry changing when it comes to jewelry ownership. Find us on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. Reach out. We'll have a chat. Even if you don't think it's relevant, like I'm always happy to discuss stuff. Equally, if anything here sounded interesting and you want to just talk more, I'm always happy to grab half an hour, have a Zoom call. Like it's a topic I really enjoy talking about. So So please reach out.
All right. Yeah, so that's the announcement from Dave. As for us, some of you might be meeting SDX Next for the first time. So just a very brief word of introduction. Hi, we're Europe's largest software development company specializing in Python. And in a nutshell, we've attracted some of the best talent in Poland. So if you're looking for designers, developers, DevOps people, Agile people, Node.js, or other types of support with building your product, you can reach out to us and we can help you with that. sdxnext.com, that's where you can find us. For more Tech Leaders Hub, techleadershub.com. Subscribe to our newsletter to be notified about upcoming sessions. We've got some sessions planned for the coming weeks. I think we might just squeeze in one more in February, so look forward to that. If you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll know all about that. Also follow SDX Next on LinkedIn and subscribe on YouTube. You might be watching this either on LinkedIn or on YouTube or on Twitter. SDX Next is where you'll find the Tech Leaders Hub. We are inextricably linked. And that's about it for the announcements. We'll be very happy to have you in our network. Dave, having been our guest, you're a friend of Tech Leaders Hub for life now. So thank you for agreeing to this. And I suppose that's going to be it for today. Oh, John is saying thank you in the comments, so just highlight that. And I'm sure as soon as we kind of go offline, people are going to be like, leaving more comments. But anyway, that's it for Tech Leaders Hub today, dear watchers and listeners. Dave, thank you again for all of your time and sharing your experience. And we'll see all of you, hopefully, next time.
Thanks very much.
Okay, I'm clicking end broadcast now. Bye.